Hi, my name is Suzanne Lewis, and I'd like to welcome you to the Festival of Friendship. We are so happy that you're here and that you're going to join us in this adventure. This evening, after the presentation, I would like you to look immediately to the left of your screen. You're going to see a button that says Sessions. If you click on that button, it will take you to another page where you can click on a session, and when you enter that session, it'll ask you to activate your video, camera, and your microphone. Go ahead and do that, and that will allow you access to a chat room where you can meet live with some of the speakers of this presentation for an informal conversation, for questions and answers, however, whatever you'd like, to ask questions, you'd like to share a thought. Please take advantage of this possibility because it's the closest thing that we're going to be able to get to meeting in person, which is really the spirit of the Festival of Friendship. We're doing everything online this year because of the pandemic. Another button to the left of the screen is for networking. If you press that button, you'll find yourself able to engage in a one-on-one video chat with another member of the audience. And this is a great feature. It's sort of like running into somebody, if you're at the live Festival of Friendship, with whom you want to speak a little bit, perhaps like running into an old friend. So take advantage of those two features. They are ways that we can foster human connection among ourselves during this time where we have to be separated. Another thing I'd like to suggest to all of you is go to our website, revolutionoftenderness.net, N-E-T, and you'll see our schedule. And if you find some presentations or some talks that really interest you, or a concert, call a friend or two or three and see if you could meet together on a patio, perhaps somewhere outside, or if you each want to watch that event separately, you could schedule a phone conversation for after that presentation so that you can discuss it with your friends. These are all ways that we can overcome some of the distance that we've had to deal with during these times. And so just remember, click on Sessions once this presentation is done so that we can get to know you a little better and so that you can ask your questions and become part of the conversation. Thank you so very much. All right, see you soon. Bye.
Everybody, it is a joy to address you at the Festival of Friendship. We are talking from the beautiful Belmont Abbey College campus. We want to extend our thanks to Suzanne Lewis and all the organizers of the festival who have extended an invitation to us to address you tonight. I'm Dr. Alessandro Rovati. I'm the chair of the Theology department at Belmont Abbey College. And I'm here with my colleague and friend Gina Noia, who is assistant professor of theology here with me at Belmont Abbey College. Today we want to reflect on the ethical considerations that the pandemic suggests to us. We have prepared this talk together because we thought it would be fitting for the Festival of Friendship to do a joint project. So here we start. On that day, when evening had come, He said to them, "Let us go across to the other side." And leaving the crowd, they took him with them, just as he was in the boat. And a great storm of wind arose, and the waves beat into the boat, so that the boat was already filling. But he was in the stern, asleep on the cushion. And they woke him and said to him, "Teacher, do you not care if we perish?" Like the disciples, we too are in the midst of a storm. The peaceful sailing that our daily routines made possible was shattered back in the spring. Now, the winds of the spreading illness, the ever-rising death count, and the economic disruption caused by the pandemic rage on. Our cities are rocked by racial grievances, ongoing protests, and violence, to the point that we wonder whether our social fabric will resist the storm or sink. Many feel powerless, lost, unsecure how to go on, and remain puzzled by God's seeming silence. The crisis makes us identify with the disciples' cry, "Teacher, do you not care if we perish?" In many ways, these times of trial have been a rude reawakening. Our respective bubbles have been burst, so that the questions we usually avoid or drown out have seized us again. What makes life worth living? Where does my certainty lie? How should I think about the mystery of suffering and death? What does it mean to educate my children? What contribution do I have to offer to those around me? We have once again discovered our vulnerability and fragility, for our illusion of control has been broken. Reality is forcing us to rethink how we live and interact with one another, thus inviting us to rediscover what is essential. The storm exposes our vulnerability and uncovers those false and superfluous certainties around which we have constructed our daily schedules, our projects, our habits and priorities, said Pope Francis in March while describing the pandemic. The pandemic shows us how we have allowed to become dull and feeble the very things that nourish, sustain, and strengthen our lives and communities. He continued, "The tempest lays bare all our prepackaged ideas and forgetfulness of what nourishes our people's souls. All those attempts that anesthetize us with ways of thinking and acting that supposedly save us." We cannot hide from the urgent call of reality that Pope Francis so strongly emphasizes. Instead, we come to realize our contingency and how much we depend on one another. We are summoned away from our usual distraction and invited into a time of choosing. This is a moment in which, as Francis says, we must choose what matters and what passes away. It is a time to separate, he continues, what is necessary from what is not. It is a time to get our lives back on track. Wake up, Lord. We identify ourselves in the disciples' plea. What surprises us instead is the reaction of Jesus. Jesus awoke and rebuked the wind, the evangelist Mark tells us, and said to the sea, "Peace, be still." And the wind ceased, and there was a great calm. He said to them, "Why are you afraid? Have you no faith?" The Lord challenges the disciples' fear. Why? Isn't fear justified when the boat is about to sink? How can Jesus be peacefully asleep in the stern? Doesn't he realize that ruin is at hand? What is the origin of his starkly different attitude? Jesus is trusting in the Father, explains Francis. We tend to react with fear when reality reveals how powerless we are. For Jesus, instead, everything is determined by the relationship with the Father. All his life is an ongoing dialogue with the mystery of God. Jesus does not succumb to fear because no challenge can shake the bond he has with the Father and the certainty that comes from it. What does Jesus' attitude tell us about how we should face the current situation? The Gospel teaches us that God is present amidst the challenge. Fear grips the disciples' hearts because the storm introduces the suspicion that God might have abandoned them. Instead, the Lord is present. The reaction to the storm shows us that despite all the miracles they have witnessed beforehand, the disciples still do not realize who Jesus is. The pandemic brings to the surface whether the journey of faith we have walked so far allows us to face difficulties certain of the Lord's presence. We are sons and daughters of a loving Father who never abandons us. But, like for the disciples, becoming aware of this relationship is not automatic. It takes a journey of knowledge in which little by little we become ever more familiar with who Jesus is and how he acts in our lives. Rather than an objection against our journey of faith, the crisis is an opportunity to grow in the certainty of the Lord. Recognizing our impotence opens up the possibility of a more authentic relationship with God. Let us quote again from Francis. Faith begins when we realize we are in need of salvation. By ourselves we founder. We need the Lord like ancient navigators needed the stars. Let us invite Jesus into the boats of our lives. Let us hand over our fears to him so that he might conquer them. Like the disciples, we will experience that with him on board, there will be no shipwreck. The danger they face amid the agitated waters forces the disciples to discover how dependent they are on Jesus. In turn, Jesus uses this occasion to manifest his power and further reveal his true identity so that the disciples may realize who he is. The result is that what begins as a fearsome event becomes a powerful occasion of conversion. They were filled with awe and said to one another, "Who then is this, that even wind and sea obey him?" A new awareness is born in the disciples. The Lord awakens us, says Francis, to reawaken and revive our Easter faith. In the midst of isolation, let us once again listen to the proclamation that saves us. God is risen and is living by our side. God uses all circumstances, even challenging ones, to manifest himself. We should not think of the pandemic as a big parenthesis, after which we will resume our real lives. We need instead to respond to the call of reality. For reality is the place where the dialogue with the mystery of God happens. The circumstances through which the Lord has us pass are essential to our vocation. The Lord calls us through the events of our lives, whether big or small, joyful or challenging. And there is no way to realize our vocation without living intensely the circumstances we are given. We are often tempted to think that the reality in which we find ourselves is an obstacle that hinders our personal fulfillment. Instead, circumstances are the place where our destiny can be realized in our relationship with the Lord.
So, let us look at our circumstances now. We are still in the midst of a storm, with Jesus still seemingly asleep, God still seemingly silent. As Pope Francis says, we recognize that, quote, "On this boat are all of us, just like those disciples who spoke anxiously with one voice, saying, 'We are perishing.' So we too have realized that we cannot go on thinking of ourselves, but only together can we do this," end quote. Yet at the very time, we are more aware than ever that we need one another. Our union and communication with others are hampered. For the disciples, by raging rain and howling wind. For us, by measures such as wearing masks and physical distancing. The obvious difference between our position and that of the disciples is that we are in control of whether we wear masks and whether we physically distance. The disciples instead had no control over the rain or the wind. Here the analogy breaks down. Unlike the disciples, we are in control of particular things that seem detrimental to community. In fact, insofar as we choose measures that seem detrimental to community, we, like Jesus, may seem open to the charge that we do not care. And let us speak truthfully. Unlike in Jesus' case, there may be some truth to this charge. We may wear masks and physically distance only because we are afraid for our own lives. We may use our masks and distancing as excuses to go on not caring for others. We may hide our selfishness behind our masks and distancing. But with purified intentions, we may mask and distance also to protect others from death, serious illness, or long-term health effects. We know that asymptomatic persons are responsible for much of the spread of COVID, and we know that masking is more effective in preventing spread when both contagious persons and healthy persons wear masks. There are also many persons, many of whom have increased risk with respect to COVID-19, who are unable safely to wear masks, such as the very young and those with certain medical conditions. Wearing masks then protects us from others who are contagious, but also protects others from us if we are contagious unknowingly. Wearing masks especially protects those who are vulnerable and those who cannot wear masks. There are real sacrifices involved in masking and distancing. Masks are physically uncomfortable, making it feel more difficult to breathe, causing our ears to hurt, sometimes causing headaches, and fogging up our glasses. It is also certainly true that masking and distancing do take away from personal interaction. Masks obscure the face, which expresses the person. Physical distancing makes us feel more distant in conversation too. Both masks and distancing seem to disrupt the naturalness and closeness of communication. And so we must wear masks in truth and in charity. Truth recognizes the physical discomfort and real social impediments of masking and distancing. But truth also recognizes the effectiveness of these measures in protecting persons, including the most vulnerable. Charity endures physical discomforts and social impediments to ourselves and allows some foreseen but unintended physical discomfort and social impediment to others for the sake of the good of the other. Masking and distancing are acts of love through which we affirm the good of the other above the inconveniences that these measures cause us. We do not mask and distance because the government or the experts ask us to. Instead, we take these measures because the love of neighbor that is capable of enduring sacrifice for the sake of the other's good is at the heart of discipleship. We take these measures because by heeding the needs of the vulnerable, we learn to embody the gaze of Jesus, a gaze of charity. Since we understand masking and distancing to be acts of charity, we want to reflect on an aspect of charity that is more often overlooked, namely, that charity desires a certain union with the beloved. This desiring of a certain union with the beloved, what we might call the social aspect of charity, calls to mind the concept of solidarity. Indeed, in his encyclical Centesimus Annus, Pope St. John Paul II says that Pope Pius XI had solidarity in mind when he spoke of social charity. And likewise, Pope Paul VI had solidarity in mind when he spoke of a civilization of love. Perhaps we are convinced that in the present pandemic, in most circumstances, all things considered, masking and distancing are done for the good of the other. But how can we say that masking and distancing are acts of charity expressing a certain union with the beloved? How can we say that masking and distancing are acts of solidarity, when wearing masks and physical distancing precisely hamper communion, as we have acknowledged? Consider the ways in which masking and distancing unite us in mind and in heart with many of those most at risk during this pandemic, with those whose lives always involve uncomfortable medical equipment, and those who cannot do all of the things and interact with others in all of the ways they want to. With respect to the physical discomforts of wearing masks, consider those who must carry around an oxygen tank, those who must have a catheter, and those who must walk with crutches. With respect to the social impact of masking and distancing, consider those who face challenges to everyday communication because they cannot see or hear or must use a machine to speak. Consider those who must receive nutrients from a feeding tube, who cannot share the same pleasures of eating a meal with others. Consider those who are sick, who cannot have any visitors. Consider those who prior to the pandemic could have visitors, but whom no one ever visited. While some of the prudent measures we take during this pandemic do challenge the communion that exists between family, friends, and others, the pandemic has also brought into stark relief the places where we lacked community that we should have had. Through our masking and distancing, we can come to understand something of the physical discomforts and social challenges that are lifelong for others. We can also offer our discomforts and loneliness to God for the sake of comfort and community for the vulnerable. And through our empathy and spiritual union with the vulnerable, we can also be moved, as Pope Francis says, to, quote, make room for the creativity that only the Spirit is capable of inspiring, end quote, and to find, quote, new forms of hospitality, fraternity, and solidarity, end quote. For example, we might connect via video call to those whose daily struggles we are just now beginning to see, such as the homebound, sick, disabled, imprisoned, or even family we have neglected. We should also examine our own close family relationships and friendships. In addition to highlighting our broken communion with the most vulnerable, the pandemic perhaps also shows us how much of our time spent and communication with others has not built maturity and depth of relationship. For instance, we often waste time on conversation and entertainment that are ultimately destructive of community. And even in our closest relationships, we still often pretend that we are entirely self-sufficient, and we are unwilling to ask for or receive help. Let us be moved in this time to find creative ways of strengthening community bonds, including with the most vulnerable who are too often passed over. Not temporary bonds, but bonds that will endure. We are still in the midst of the storm, and the storm has lasted much longer than we may have anticipated. We long for the quieting of the storm, for calm waters, to gather with friends and family, to share meals and conversation freely and closely once more. Let us not be found during this time living in fear or imprudence. Let us choose to allow God to help us grow in faith and charity. God's apparent silence, Jesus' sleep, is not a sign that he does not care, but a means through which he can enter into a deeper relationship with his disciples. May our masking and distancing not indicate a lack of care, but may they be a means to enter into deeper relationships with God and others. May we, hampered in our union with others by the howling winds and raging rain, find new ways of solidarity such that when the storm does pass, we do not simply go back to how things were before. Rather, may we return to gatherings with friends and family that are now more inclusive of the vulnerable and more centered on Christ and the good of the other. May we be found in closer union with God and one another.
Hi, I'm Clare Thompson. I'm a science teacher and I'm a mom. I taught junior high and high school for 7 years. And then when I had kids, I stayed home and homeschooled for 25 years. Last year, I went back to teaching and I got a job at a local online charter school. And I experienced many of the challenges that distance learning requires even before the pandemic hit. So I love the topic of this panel, which is the one who has a why to live can bear any how. How can we bear the constraints of teaching at this time? What are the ethical implications of this challenge? I've been able to experience happiness and fulfillment in my teaching, even though it's been a lot of sacrifice and it's been grueling and difficult at times. So it is possible to bear this. First, I want to just share why I teach. I've always loved school when I was a kid, but it wasn't until two teachers that touched me that I really was ignited with the desire to become a teacher. And the first was my junior high teacher. I was having a terrible time in junior high, and she just noticed me. She reached out to me, and it meant so much to me. I was so moved that at that time, I remember I vowed that I was going to become a junior high teacher and be like her and help kids the way she helped me. And then the second was my art teacher in high school, who again reached out and saw me. He actually became like a foster father to me. And he helped me get my first adult job in the wilderness. He changed my life. And so what I learned from these teachers is that relationships are the most important part of education. It was for me, and I saw it also in my own experiences teaching. I wanted to follow them and be like them. And then I remember I did go into teaching, and in my student teaching, I was struck by a poem I came across. And it was just talking about, it was a poem about teaching and kind of the litany of everything a teacher has to do and all the fussing over curriculum. But it ended with this line: teaching is the art of being human and of communicating that humanness to others. And that sort of encapsulated my experience and desire in teaching. And I put that in my lesson book for every year for 7 years that I taught. Well, then I married and I stayed home with my children, and I began seriously looking at what did I have to offer them in education, and in particular in religious education, which led me on a journey to my reversion in the church and to encountering a really exceptional community and my journey in continual conversion. And I had thought I found Christ, but really Christ found me. And actually, more accurately, I encountered Christ incarnate in the people that he had given me. And I began to understand things. So Sam Ewell, in a different panel in the festival, spoke of a quote by Kierkegaard, which says, "Life can only be understood backwards, but must be lived forwards." And so at that time, I began to understand how the teachers that had touched me, my desire for relationship and teaching, basically many things that had happened in my life, my fascination with the wilderness, were all Christ leading me on my journey further up and further in relationship with him. And I began to verify that everything is given, that I could be open to all circumstances, and that he would be present in them, and that the event of encountering him happens again and again. So this ignited my relationships with students, with other people, with everyone, because I was in relationship with Christ in my relationships with people. So education became so much more than just communicating my humanness to others, but beginning to recognize Christ in my student and myself being able to gaze on them with that love of Christ in me. However, when I returned to teaching last year, it was really suffocating. The curriculum is an asynchronous program, and so it essentially is students clicking through lessons on their own. I'm not actively teaching them. I'm just facilitating them getting through the program, unlocking tests with a click, trying to teach them concepts, but a lot of them just wouldn't, they don't have to connect with me. So I just felt like my job as a teacher was really inhuman, and I never got to see my students. So then a 12-year-old boy actually came to my attention because he wasn't completing his work and moving through the program. And I reached out to him and I talked with him. And I discovered he was home alone all day on his farm, and he had to do his chores and he had to get his school done. And he just really needed a face. And so I began to meet with him in the morning and in the afternoon, and we developed a really beautiful friendship. And he would take me with FaceTime to see his animals and show me things that he was doing around his farm. And I was so surprised at how Christ met me in this situation. And so then this year now, with the pandemic, enrollment in our school has just skyrocketed, and there are more questions and more challenges, and I'd like to just share 4 of them. And the first challenge is, there are many more students, but I really am confirmed that I have a moral obligation to be in relationship with these students. Relationship is the essence of education, and it's very time consuming, and it's a great sacrifice, but it is essential for me because it's also where I meet Christ in my job. It's essential for my happiness. And so I have a time slot for every student. I meet with them every week. I keep notes on our discussion. I chat with them through the day if they need to through Google Chat. And it's been very beautiful, and many students are trying to make sense of the pandemic, and many are, with their family, with vulnerable members they're protecting by staying home. And, they're just witnessing to me of the beauty of relationships that are growing and flourishing in the pandemic. And I've also been trying to Zoom over, having like a lunch chat with all of the middle school students, and facilitating different activities where they can grow in relationship online. So it's very encouraging. But again, this is, to me, it's an absolute essential thing that I have to do. And secondly, of course, I have an obligation to teach with some academic rigor. And we still have the asynchronous program, but I feel that it's not enough. And so I've built in checkpoints where they need to actually talk to me about concepts, where we have to actually connect, and I can show them experiments online and over the Zoom and things like that. I just have been able to start my own class and design it and have kids doing things with me over Google Hangout as well, which has been very beautiful. But I know other teachers are having to redo everything that they've done for years, just because it's needing to be done online now, and it just doesn't work. And so then it's causing all of us to rethink, what is really the heart of the content that we're trying to get across? What are the essential things? And so it's bringing really a freshness to teaching, because it's not just this mechanical thing that I've done for so many years, but something new. And it requires a lot of creativity in trying to figure out how to do things like hands-on activities and experiments and research for simulations and ways that kids can be involved in real scientific research around the world. There's a lot of amazing things happening that are very beautiful and can connect kids. But again, this takes time and sacrifice. And then there's a third issue, which is equitable learning. And these kids, some of them don't have decent internet connection, or they get too many people on the internet at the same time, and so they're not able to complete their work. And then we have, kids with homes that are very disruptive and dysfunctional. And then there's other kids that are technically challenged, and there's other kids with learning disabilities. So all of these things require intense creativity and a desire to really help the individual, and with a lot of flexibility. For example, in my art environmental ed class, I'm having kids go out in nature and keep a nature journal. But to see their nature journal, to see their reflections, to see their drawings, they come to me in about a dozen different ways, depending on the student and the way that that person can communicate back to me. So it requires a lot of creativity, flexibility, and patience. And so all of this is, of course, very taxing on the teachers. And so the fourth issue is that teachers' lives are very important. And we're distance learning also to protect teachers from the virus, as well as, not spreading it to other vulnerable people in the culture. But it's far too easy to let work consume home life when you're working at home. And so that's a real important boundary, and to set boundaries around the job and time slots, for things that I can do through the day. I've been making sure that I do what I tell the kids to do: get out in nature, do some phenology, look at what's happening out there, and with the seasonal changes, going for walks. But there's a real temptation to, just check the emails or just see what's going on with some of the assignments. And I have to just remember that self-care is essential. So, so in the end, the why sustains me in all these challenges, because I know that Christ is present in the midst of them. These circumstances are given, and the realities I have to accept. And if I don't accept them, I'm coming at things with my energy tied up and not freeing up my energy to be creative. So when I accept reality and I'm open to the new things that Christ is doing, then I can allow his creativity to move in me as well. So these, the circumstances of the pandemic are given, and it's my response, it's our response, that is the moral question. And I've only grown in certainty because I have friends that I can meet with in prayer every morning. And we meet once a week and do study together in our school of community. And they help me to be able to say yes to this, to say yes to reality, to any circumstance. And there are so many beautiful surprises. But to be grateful requires, it's a choice. And I believe I have a moral obligation to look for that, to be grateful for my students, because otherwise I'm not going to see the way I can reach them and help them best. But like there are students, there's a beautiful inclusion. Students that wouldn't normally talk in class because of some kids dominating a discussion. With Flipgrid, everybody gives a response. Everybody has a voice and everybody's heard. In one school, I know students are blossoming in creativity. They can't have their homecoming dance, so they're doing an outdoor movie in the field. Every conversation I have with a student is meaningful to me, and it is for them, I can tell. Nothing seems to be taken for granted. I have an assignment, like I had said, for students to go outside and be mindfully present to nature. And I'm seeing even the kids that are truant or typically were truant last year and we struggle with their attendance. These assignments they're doing, and they're responding in words like awe and wonder and peace and joy in front of nature. So it's really beautiful to see some of these surprises. So I know that I can be happy and fulfilled in this circumstance, but it requires my choice to trust and to follow and know that Christ is present, and that if I choose to look for him, I can find him. And I can do that because I know that the meaning of my life is relationship with him. And that allows me to bear this. So I thank you for listening, and I hope that you all are able to bear this and help each other through this really difficult time of the pandemic.
Hi, friends. It's a real pleasure for me to be here with you, even in a remote and a virtual way. I'm really grateful for this opportunity to be a part of this conference, and I hope that what I say here can contribute in some way to the work of friendship, even though, as I said, in the current circumstances, we face certain obligations of separateness. The title of this brief reflection is this: the one who has a why to live can bear any how. Ethical questions that have arisen as a result of the pandemic. Now, the thoughts that I want to share with you today are generally quite simple ones. My own experience is that the pandemic has stripped us down to basics, in some ways stripped us bare, certainly has stopped habits of just sleepwalking through life, doing as we have always done, and required us to be more intentional. That can be very painful, but it can also be a good thing. So when I turn my attention to the subtitle that I mentioned, ethical questions that have arisen as a result of the pandemic, I find myself led back to some of the most basic questions suggested by the title. If we have a why to live, we can bear any how. If we have a why to live, we can bear any how. That saying originates originally with a philosopher who was fundamentally atheist in his commitments. He too said something very similar, but I think it's interesting to note that the phrase is, you have it here, the one who has a why to live can bear any how, actually finds new life in the work of Viktor Frankl in his famous book, Man's Search for Meaning. In that book, Frankl, who was a brilliant psychoanalyst, chronicles one of the most horrifying circumstances imaginable: life in a Nazi concentration camp. Frankl, along with his family and community as a Jew, was forcibly deported to the concentration camp, and he brought with him, interestingly, his background, his experience, and the eye of someone who was involved in therapy, both before and after that experience. He notes in the book that those who survived the camp, interestingly enough, were not always the strongest, not always those who were given the largest food rations or other resources. Rather, in fact, it was something like a why that allowed them to persevere through weeks, months, sometimes years, where no hope was visible at all. Now, our experience of this pandemic may not be that of a concentration camp, but I think there are echoes of certain common themes. There is uncertainty, there is fatigue, there is a separation from loved ones, and of course, for many, there has been the experience of, or the fear of, real suffering and even death. So for us now, I want to pose the question, what is that why that can lead us to fruitful and life-giving ways forward? And in the spirit of simplicity that I have already mentioned, I want to direct our attention to what I take to be the single most important tenet of the Christian faith. There's one reality that underlies everything else for us, inviting us to come and claim it as our foundation. And that is that God loves us. Even more, we could say that God loves us with a patient and attentive love, a love that does not forget us. You can hear it in these words from the book of the prophet Isaiah. Though the mountains be shaken and the hills be removed, yet my unfailing love for you will not be shaken, nor my covenant of peace be removed, says the Lord who has compassion on you. Or again, in another passage from Isaiah, fear not, for I have redeemed you. I have called you by name, you are mine. When you pass through the waters, I will be with you, and through the rivers, they shall not overwhelm you. When you walk through fire, you shall not be burned, and the flame shall not consume you, for I am the Lord your God, the Holy One of Israel, your Savior. Now, this reference to God's work in Israel reminds us of a pattern that we see present there, and it's one that I want to focus on now. God chooses God's people, Israel. God loves Israel, and God seeks to build a community of love and faithfulness, and then to work outwards from that circle of love to love the whole world. So all the families of the earth, God says to Abraham, will be blessed through you. In our own moment of challenge, I want to suggest God is inviting us to a similar dynamic. God invites us above all to reestablish ourselves in this fundamental reality of God's love, to know ourselves anew as God's beloved, and to nourish in our homes, parishes, neighborhoods, communities, extended families, a community of love, which can then spill over in generosity to the world around us. For my own family, the specific challenges of this pandemic arrived early. 2 of the first cases of the coronavirus in the United States occurred in teachers at our children's high school who had taken a school trip to Europe. In the first week of March, we received a phone call from our state's Department of Health letting us know that 2 of our children had been exposed and would have to quarantine for 2 weeks. I was not overly worried, but I have to say it was an experience that brought a little shock of fear and uncertainty. If our children had gotten the virus, then I knew that the rest of our family would be likely to get it soon. And in fact, one of those teachers in our children's school came very close to death. For me, there was a 3-fold process that had to take place immediately. I had to respond to my own children's fear with care, with love. I had to do what I could to make sure that they knew at that moment and in those circumstances that they were loved. And then I also had to begin immediately to speak to them about the love to which they were called. They did not want to stay home and miss everything for 2 weeks, especially because at that point they didn't foresee the larger shutdown that was coming. So I needed to frame that for them as an invitation of love, as a challenge to love that they could meet. And finally, after I had had a chance to take my breath, I had to reroot myself in love. You know, I often find that I feel God's love most in the love of God's people. And I have to say that our family was really enveloped in love at that time. We had friends who sent care packages, who brought dinner to our doorstep, who told us in 1,000 ways that we were loved, that we were remembered. I think the larger situation of this pandemic, into which we have all now been drawn, requires something like that from all of us. We have to turn to those closest to us with tenderness and compassion. We have to challenge our families and our communities to self-sacrificial love that will protect others. And undergirding all of that, we have to reroot ourselves in this bedrock truth. God loves us. God sees us, and we are not forgotten. My concern is that if we come to the ethical challenges created by this pandemic without those fundamental senses of connection and rooting, then we move quickly into scolding, whether others or ourselves, blaming, and even a dark kind of despair. In the end, the specific, concrete directives that we follow have to be rooted in that love. In fact, I want to go on to suggest to you 2 particular forms of love that I think are especially important right now. They sound very simple, but I want to say a little bit more about each of them. The first is paying attention, and the second is having patience. So first of all, paying attention, or we might say the practice of attending well. Now, at first glance, this may seem to be a very superficial instruction to pay attention. But if we look at it in a theological light, I think we will see otherwise. What is attending except taking the time the space, the energy that we need to see well the reality around us, to calm our minds and to give ourselves over to that reality. Simone Weil, the 20th century philosopher, has noted for us that this kind of habit of attending well is actually the essence of prayer itself. And I think it is equally important for the work of love that we have before us. If we are able, as Simone Weil puts it, to examine squarely and to contemplate attentively and slowly, we have a crucial first step. Of course, it's important to note that the more demanding and chaotic our situation grows, the more intentional we'll have to be in doing that work. So my first point is really that, especially now, the work of love requires time and space and quiet. And if your life is like mine, you will only find that by really looking for it. It's in that kind of a space, out of that kind of a space, that we can love by attending well in relationship to the various concentric circles that I've described. Attending to those who are immediately around us, seeing them for who they are, even when phones are dinging and appointments are piling up. Attending then also to the larger world, to complex situations that are swirling around us. We all have limitations in the extent to which we can do that. But when we do it from a space of calm and quiet, we will do it better. And then finally, I want to note, we have the project of attending even to ourselves, especially as the situation grows more and more chaotic and more demanding. The temptation is simply to react, to deal with the world around us, sometimes to deal with the splinter in our neighbor's eye, without taking the time to turn and attend to ourselves. But that, I think, is essential. And then secondly, the project of having patience. Now, patience is something that is more often mentioned in connection with the spiritual life. Many of you will know, for example, in the 5th chapter of Galatians, St. Paul mentions patience specifically as one of the fruits of the Spirit, is an evidence of the Spirit at work within us. But what is patience? For our purposes here, I would emphasize that patience means precisely choosing love in a situation that we cannot control. It has specifically to do with enduring, with undergoing circumstances that are beyond our ability to change. It has to do with bearing trouble that we did not choose. So in our moment, in our circumstances, where that is very familiar, we have a new opportunity. I find that even when we know better, we tend not to think of it in that way. We tend to frame the work of bearing unchosen circumstances simply as an unfortunate and hopefully a temporary situation. We crave the return of control. But it's for that reason, not in spite of it, that this moment offers its own opportunity. Again, here now, with the specific challenges that we face, whether it's calls from our state's Department of Health, new to-do lists, whether it is the pain, frustration, and anger of those around us. In the midst of losses and new forms of grief, we have the possibility of rerouting ourselves in God's own attentive, patient love, and then, as we can, inviting others into that same demanding, beautiful, life-giving reality. I pray that all of you who are listening to me now will find your own way forward in that work.